So how's it going, guys? I'm here with a review of Ruthless Aggression, episode 2 with John Cena. So I meant to get to this earlier, but I had a few other things I wanted to do here on this channel first. Other videos that I've been working on, such as the Sonic 2 retrospective, which took me a long time to do, so go check that out if you haven't already. But we're going to talk about this John Cena episode. So, you know, I enjoy, like, watching these for, like, the moments and seeing, like, the highlights. Like, they're very well edited. And I like hearing the comments, even though a lot of it is very inaccurate. It's a lot of BS. And it's a lot of, like, rewriting of history, retelling history in a distorted way. As I said within the first episode, you could tell right away this is going to be the way how certain people see things. And you've seen, you know, as you watch these, like, shoot interviews and documentaries, based on where a certain person is and what position they're in at that current time, really depends on their honesty and what they say. Honestly, you know, like, in these documentaries, they're never going to be that controversial unless it's like that's the mindset of the company that time. Like, if you want to bash WCW, that's fine. Go ahead, bash that. You could bash ECW, you could do that, but, like, you notice, like, there's a few things that you don't do. You know, you don't, like, bash certain wrestlers. Like, you know, you don't say anything bad about Triple H. You don't, like, there's a lot of, like, different, like, probably unwritten rules that you're not supposed to do in these, like, network produced, or, like, you know, they used to mostly be on DVDs that you don't do. They, you know, they don't want you saying certain things, and that's understandable because it's within the company. And that's the problem when, like, a company produces a documentary about themselves. You're going to see, like, okay, I will say that at least they, you know, they do sometimes criticize themselves. They do, you know, they do actually, like, sometimes criticize certain decisions. But then I've noticed they talk about things that were actually good or over, and then, like, they'll blame the wrestler. So we're going to get to that. So John Cena, so they, you know, we talk about John Cena and where they were at in the Ruthless Aggression era, and Bruce Pritchard is talking all about, you know, how they needed new talent, and they talk about OVW and how they saw this, you know, young John Cena down there tag teaming with Rico Constantine. They pretty much say, like, how they looked at Rico and didn't see, you know, anything, you know, that special, even though the guy was very charismatic, and they probably could have gotten even more out of him than they did. But they talk about John Cena. Obviously, yes, side by side with Rico and John Cena, you're obviously, you know, if you are willing to admit it, that is, John Cena obviously looked like the bigger star attitude. He's also bigger. But Rico Constantine was no joke. If you looked at that guy's physique, it was pretty insane in its own right. And the guy had a lot of charisma. You look back and look at that guy's body of work in 2002, and he did a tremendous job. You know, you could also look at, like, what he did even tag teaming with Charlie Haas. You know, that was pretty controversial, but that guy, you know, he really had a knack for sports entertainment and entertainment in general. But, you know, if you look at that guy's background, by the way, if you know about Rico and everything, that guy is, you know, he was on there with, like, Kenny Bolin one time when Vince Russo used to have him on this channel. And, you know, Rico was, like, you know, he was in, he worked for the federal government. You know, this guy was a, he worked for the FBI. This guy was, you know, this was a really, you know, he didn't play a masculine figure on TV, but this was a masculine guy. Rico was a guy who actually could kick someone's ass. Rico is definitely one of those guys that you could say was very underrated. Didn't get to where he probably envisioned that he would be, and others probably envisioned him when he was down in OVW. It's a shame, but anyway, with John Cena. So they showed John Cena, you know, being brought up from OVW in his initial match with Kurt Angle. And, you know, things like this just show, like, John just coming out there and Kurt Angle in the ring, and they didn't really have to say a whole lot. And you kind of, like, have to look at these things, like, you know, you look at, like, Roman Reigns and Goldberg, like, with, you know, the one-word thing, like, I'm next, and it, like, doesn't really work. But, like, here was, like, the right moment to use that, like, one-word response, and it really worked so well, because it was, like, leading right into a match. And you could probably say, like, oh, he only said one word, and then they had a match. You know, he says, well, you know, 2 words, Ruthless Aggression. Then they start having, you know, a really good match. This was a match, like, one of these matches that you just don't get anymore, where it's like, it's safe, but it still looked really, you know, aggressive and the hard hitting, and, you know, they had a lot of great, like, technical spots in it. It was really fast paced. You didn't have to see a bunch of suicide planches, a bunch of, you know, nonsensical high spots. It was good stuff. Then Kurt ends it, you know, with sort of a crucifix pin, and it was great. And then they talk about, like, after that, the Undertaker with the epic handshake. That was a great moment. I'd even posted that on my Instagram, like, you know, a while back, saying, like, that was a moment to remember. You know, after the match with Kurt Angle, you know, kind of showed, like, this guy was someone to take notice of. See, that was a match that mattered. You know, even though John lost that match, they'd always do this. They think having matches puts people over. And then they had Undertaker, you know, in the back, shaking the hand of John Cena. Then they show, you know, they had the match with Jericho, and he beats Jericho. And then they talk like they almost don't know why John didn't get over. You know, kind of really skipping ahead a bit too fast there in this little, you know, documentary, you know, docu-series or whatever you want to call it. And saying like, oh, I don't know. And then they talk about how John Cena was close to getting fired. And this was something that John had talked about recently, kind of, I guess, as a lead-in to this, you know, of this episode. He was going to get fired because, you know, he wasn't getting over with the crowd anymore. It was pretty much, John was like that one-hit wonder at this moment. And I love how they have, like, Pritchard sitting around, like, saying, like, you know, it wasn't enough. You know, this guy was coming out in plain tights. And the funny thing is, it's like, you listen to all these, you know, guys like, you know, Brian Gerwitz and all that, like, and these guys, like, don't want to take any responsibility at all. They're just like, well, I don't know why he didn't get over. Like, meanwhile, there's a writer there. You know, there's, like, a big-time producer there, Bruce Pritchard. And, like, no one can figure out why they can't get a guy like Cena, a guy that looks like John Cena, over. And this is when they had, like, more resources at their disposal. You know, they had a better mindset, and they couldn't figure it out. It's still, like, you see that there was always something with WWE where they just couldn't figure it out. You know, it's really, they just had a lot of very special people, you know, like Undertaker and Stone Cold, where they just needed a push. But you really do see, like, this was the start of things unraveling for WWE. Like, I know every single time I come on here, I really sound like a Vince Russo mark, but that was the only time in WWE, besides the 80s, where it really felt like WWE was consistently and constantly building stars, and it didn't seem like really too many people were getting left behind. Not everybody was making it to the main event, but the mid-card felt special. You know, why did all these people seem, you know, like in the Ruthless Aggression era, they even admit, like, they were all over the place. They didn't know what to do, you know, with a lot of people. Like, they're admitting their incompetence. And that wasn't a problem when Ed Ferreira and Vince Russo were there. It didn't seem like a problem at all. They were on the right track. There were very few hiccups. You know, nowadays when people do retrospectives on the Attitude Era, like, you know, Brian Alvarez, they always talk about it in a very negative light, try to make you think like it was more, of good memories than anything. Like you've kind of just had that nostalgic mindset for. But no, I've went back and I've watched pretty much the majority of the Russo-ridden Raws and SmackDowns and the pay-per-views. Oh, and they're good. Trust me, they're way better than the Ruthless Aggression stuff. Now, Ruthless Aggression, like Brian Jurwitz is a very talented writer. This guy was responsible for actually coming up with a lot of good moments. He is a creative guy. He's not as good as Russo, but he was good. He really did have a good mind for entertainment, and you could tell that this guy really was influenced by Russo. Probably wouldn't admit it. Unless it was like in secrecy. But you could tell there was so many Crash TV moments that Brian Jurwitz penned that he was a Russo mark. You could tell that he likes Russo, and he would not admit it. He would never give credit in any of these like interviews that he's doing. But I see a lot of that. But anyway, let's talk about how like they all failed Cena and they're all acting like, oh, I don't get it. Then they talk about how John Cena was heard rapping on a bus, and it was his final days in WWE, because just like so many other wrestlers, McMahon and the rest of them had given up on Cena. Like, I love it. Like, let's not talk to Cena. Let's not get to know him. Like, maybe if they talked to him and got to know him, maybe they'd know about this rapping talent. So really, it was like, Cena was really lucky that he just happened to be showcasing that, that exclusive talent at that moment in time, and he happened to be overheard by Stephanie McMahon. And so I guess, Stephanie is not the clueless person that she is nowadays. She heard John rapping, and, so would you like to do that on TV? And, so he started doing it on TV, and the rest was history. And so, they talk about all the moments, and they kind of like fast forward through all that. And the weird thing is, then they talk about like how that's the thing that I don't get with John Cena. In 2005, he decided that he didn't want to do the rapping gimmick anymore. And I get like why you wouldn't want to do a gimmick like that, you know what I mean? Because it's like, there's only so many raps that you could do before that runs out. I don't know if this was really John talking for real in this, but he said because he looked out at the audience and he saw more and more families were bringing kids to the events. There were kids in the audience even during the Attitude Era. There were kids in the events at all times. I don't get it. Like, it's not like there was this big upswing in kids at the time. Like, this is what I really don't understand. When you look out at the crowd, you see kids, and you see a bunch of goofballs nowadays, right? Talking about in 2020. You see the really nerdy, obsessed, smarkish fans, and then you also see kids. But like John is talking about in 2005, and he stopped rapping. Then people like didn't really see a whole lot of good with John, and you saw like John's character got even cheesier. The promos, he was being told to say things that weren't even really appealing to children. They just sounded very hokey, corny, and that's the thing. John was always talented, always put on good matches, always showed charisma. But like I said, it's like even the same problem like nowadays. They were giving him some really like terrible stuff to say. But I mean, no, he was still good though in 2005. But like as time progressed, he got cornier and cornier. But it was like they ripped it away from him when the gimmick still had a lot more potential. And the reason was not that. It wasn't that John ran out of raps, or he didn't feel like he wanted to do that gimmick anymore because, he just didn't like it. It was just that he said that he saw more families and he didn't want to be known for that. I don't get that, because he also then would come out there and say that he was going to kick people's asses and stuff, and like, and was doing all this other type of stuff. And they tried to make him like the fun-loving, joking around kind of guy. And it was a lot of times he would still come out there, and I am still now kind of referring to 2006 and stuff. And then they also kind of made it really generic, where he was like, you know, come get some, don't sing it, bring it. They made him more generic with his like catchphrases and stuff. And I don't, you know, they're not going to get into all that, but that's where they really started to screw up John Cena. I actually think when they have him come out now, has more freedom on the mic. I think that's the thing. Even though the product is bad, he actually cuts better promos now than he did back then. Because something was where they don't want to admit it, but John, you know, was like under their control. Vince McMahon saw that this guy was pushing merchandise at an alarmingly fast rate, and they wanted to pump it out. But see, the thing was, they never jumped on it. When the crowd was booing John in 2006, and they were actually, you know, jumping on the bandwagon for when Edge dethroned him as champion, you know, after the whole Money in the Bank cash-in, they didn't take advantage of John, you know, being hated by the crowd. They just started saying, oh, you know, this guy is polarizing and everything. And it's the same thing that they then repeated with Roman Reigns. We have a talented guy here. But, you know, it was the same thing like with Hulk Hogan. But the crowd is booing him. There's audible boos, and yes, there's still some cheers in there. But when it's that divided, it sounds ridiculous on TV that this is the guy. And I know, like, it sounds good. You know, after a while, you know, it sounds good, like, you know, hearing this crowd, it makes it exciting. But after a while, it was like they were trying to build and book this guy as a baby face that was like overcoming. But the thing was, he was being cheesy a lot of the time. They were having him make a lot of like poop jokes and stuff. See, that was something that he did do a lot of even back then. A lot of like poop jokes and stuff like that. And you know, this was the problem at the time. It really was like John was being booked to not be himself. And this is where, you know, Brian Gerwitz, you know, and Bruce Pritchard will take no responsibility. They'll go, hey, oh, you know, this is where it differed than like the Russo era of writing, where Russo would have sat down with John and said, okay, you don't want to do the rapping gimmick anymore. If that was the case, because you see more kids out there, say that was the reason. Say, you know, he didn't want to be known for the rapping. Maybe they should have expanded more on it. Well, John, is it maybe more because you know, you want to like build your brand? You don't want to be known as like the rapper, you know, that you know, uses a lot of expletives and stuff. You maybe want to clean it a little bit up because you want to build your brand into being a movie star. And that's eventually what John Cena did. So maybe that's why. Maybe he wanted to be viewed more as a like a role model and something along those lines. Maybe is that why they wanted to go that he wanted to go that route? See, where Vince Russo would have sat down with John Cena and discussed an alternative, they didn't with John. They kind of just gave him this generic, you know, let's go gun ho, you know, just do this salute and like run down to the ring. And there was really, like, when you think about it, there really was no character there with John Cena. They just kind of stripped everything away from him all at once, and they kind of just left him in a shell of the gimmick. You know, he kind of still dressed the same and, you know, kind of did the whole swagger the same way, but the promos didn't have the same punch. And that was the thing. It was really affecting John's delivery of promos. That's what I'm saying. I think there's a bit of dishonesty going on there. That's all I'm going to say about that, really, because I don't really know for sure if that's John's real reason, but I suspect it's an extremely edited and, you know, watered down version of how John really felt by saying it was just because the kids were there. So, you know, I think that they pulled a lot of punches in this episode. They certainly did. They didn't give you the full story. It really just kind of irked me how they were like, well, we're giving up on John Cena. Oh, but he has a talent that we didn't know about. Like, here's the thing. How did they not know about the talent. It is the writers and the producers. And, you know, like, you would think that somebody down in OVW or something would have said, hey, you know, this guy's good at doing this. You know, like, there seemed like there was some, you know, bad communication, you know, about John. Like, they wanted this guy. You see that you have a prospect, and they thought that they could just book him in matches and he would get over. Did that work for Stone Cold? Did that work for The Rock? Like, here's the thing. Like, and people were saying this for the longest time, so this is by no means original content you're getting right here from this mouth. But, you know, The Rock was not over, you know, when he came to WWE. People didn't like this smiling, you know, goofy kid that was like a third generation superstar. You know, people were like, you know, this sucks. There, you know, he's just having matches and stuff, and there's, you know, these promos are boring, and he's too much of a goody two shoes, and, you know, kind of kissing babies type of guy. And then what did they do? You know, Vince Russo came along, and what happened? They wrote him in as a heel, and the rest was history. Look where The Rock is now. See, that's what it does. Just like that, a wrestler's career, thanks to good writing and good foresight, and, you know, just genuinely caring about the talent and getting to know them and building their characters, how important it is to have a character, how important it is that the wrestler feels comfortable on TV. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, so it's definitely not as bad as Bayley, you know, not as uncomfortable as that. But still, you know, there was a lot of awkward moments for John Cena to be that high up in the company. And they kind of put him in a position where he was being forced into being their top babyface. But when the crowd, it still wasn't full of smart marks yet, and people were turning on him. And they did not want to turn the guy heel. They didn't even want to tweak his character at all. They did tweak his character, and they got rid of everything that got him over in the first place. And I think they forgot that if you're going to take away someone's character and their gimmick, you better replace it with something that is, you know, equally as good, if not better, preferably better, you know. And they didn't do that, and that was the problem. And of course, you won't see any of that addressed anywhere in this episode. Well, there you go, guys. So the next episode is the one on Evolution. I actually have not seen that one yet. I have watched the, you know, first, second episode, the fourth, and the fifth. And that's pretty much going to be it. So I'm planning on doing reviews for all of them. So, you know, bear with me for a little bit while I, you know, manage to actually make those videos for you while working on some other things that I have planned for this channel. So stay tuned. And, you know, guys, you know, I want to thank you all for watching this video. I want to thank the great Patreons that I have. You know, I've you know, sometimes neglected to mention those great people. So you saw starting with the Sonic 2 retrospective, I started doing that, and I'm going to try to be consistent with that for now on. So I want to thank all you guys, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel, guys, let's try to get this channel to 7,000 subscribers. That would be fantastic and make me feel great here in 2020. So let's make that happen. And anyway, guys, subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell so you get all the notifications when I post all my new videos. And guys, I'll see you next time.